How can a river be less studied than the surface of the moon? The Lena stretches across a space comparable to Western Europe. And the more closely scientists examine it, the more questions arise. Along its banks, traces of ancient life are found that fit poorly into familiar frameworks. In its channel lie hidden depressions, whose nature is still debated. And along the water stand stone walls, as if they were built not by the wind, but by some precise hand. For 40 kilometers along the banks of the Lena rise the famous Lena Pillars. In places, they reach a height of 100 meters. The first Russian explorers took them for fortress walls. Their forms seemed that regular. For the Yakuts, this place was sacred. People tried not to approach it without need. The pillars themselves are made of Cambrian limestone. They are about 500 million years old. In broad terms, the mechanism of their formation is understood. The rock cracked, and then wind, water, and frost gradually eroded it along its weak lines. That is how the separate columns appeared, but the main mystery lies elsewhere. The system of cracks from which this stone forest grew is far too regular. Geologists note a striking detail. Over a vast stretch, the cracks form an almost rectangular grid. The intervals between them look astonishingly even, and the deviation of most vertical cracks from true vertical does not exceed 2 or 3 degrees. And this is across the entire 40-kilometer section. For a random natural process, such regularity looks extremely unusual. That is why the debate has not died down to this day. The general outline is clear, but the exact mechanism behind the emergence of such an even fracture structure has still not received a definitive explanation. And this makes the Lena Pillars not just a beautiful natural monument, but a genuine geological mystery. At their base, fauna from the Cambrian period are found. These include trilobites, archaeocyoths, brachiopods, and other ancient marine organisms. The preservation of many specimens is exceptional. Here, one can literally hold in one's hands a creature that lived 500 million years ago. For paleontology, this place is priceless. But even here, not everything is straightforward. Some of the finds do not fit the known picture of Cambrian ecosystems in the region. Certain species appear in one specific layer, then suddenly vanish in the neighboring one. There is still no obvious explanation for this. The Lena keeps secrets, not only on its banks, but underwater as well. It is one of the few largest rivers on the planet, for which there is still no complete detailed bathymetric map. The average depth across most of its channel is relatively modest. Usually it is around 10 or 15 meters. But in certain sections, entirely different values have been recorded. Between the mouths of the Aldan and the Viluy, echo sounders have shown basins as deep as 60 or even 70 meters. For a lowland river of this type, that is anomalously deep. Some geologists link these depressions to tectonic faults. Others believe they are traces of ancient karst sinkholes, later covered by river sediments. There is no consensus, and this is where the strangest part begins. Fishermen who have worked these stretches for decades have long spoken of very strange instrument behavior. Echo sounders sometimes show signals that resemble neither bottom relief nor schools of fish. At some points, the data from several independent instruments contradict one another, although at the same point, that should not happen. A full hydrological study of these deep basins has never been carried out. The Lena still remains one of the most poorly studied major river systems in the world, not because it is impossible, but because a huge part of its basin is hard to access, and for a long time was considered economically secondary. A separate story is connected with the Viluy. It is the largest left tributary of the Lena. It flows through a territory the local Evenks call Ayuyu Cherkechek. This is usually translated as the Accursed Valley. The name itself appeared long before the arrival of the Russians, and that alone is enough to give one pause. Geologically, The Vilyuy Basin really is unusual. Russia's largest diamond deposits are located here. They are associated with kimberlite pipes. These are gigantic channels formed by ancient explosive eruptions of magma from depths of 150 to 200 kilometers. The Mir Pipe, the Udaknaya Pipe, and many other sites emerged here in different eras over the course of hundreds of millions of years. This background alone points to an extremely turbulent geological history. By the way, if you're interested in little-known details like these, subscribe to the channel. Here we examine not only the legends, but also what may actually lie behind them. In the Vilyuy area, persistent magnetic anomalies have been recorded. At some points, the compass deviates by several degrees. At the same time, there is no obvious cause visible on the surface. In addition, thermal anomalies have been noted in several places. The heat emissions did not correspond to known underground structures. For the harsh Siberian territory, this is especially noticeable. And then the stories begin, stories that for decades have balanced between folklore and unproven fact. Yakut hunters of the 19th century spoke of metallic, dome-shaped objects partially sunk into the ground. According to them, it was warmer inside, and one could shelter there from the frost. Soviet expeditions in the 1930s and 1950s tried to find these objects, but they were unable to document them. The working version among geologists was more down to earth. Perhaps people had seen fragments of ancient kimberlite structures with an unusual rock composition. But the problem is that the objects themselves were never reliably described, measured, or identified. That is why the story of the Cursed Valley still remains an area of dispute. On the banks of the Lena and its tributaries, the permafrost reveals another chapter of the past every year. In summer, the banks are washed away by water, layers of permafrost crumble, and the remains of Ice Age animals emerge. This is not a rarity, but an almost seasonal phenomenon. But what amazes researchers is not only the very fact of the finds, but their condition. Fur, tissue, stomach contents, all of this is sometimes preserved as if not tens of thousands of years had passed, but far less. In general terms, the mechanism of preservation is understood. Cold, dryness, rapid freezing, and the absence of active microorganisms slow decomposition. But the details of this process are still being studied, especially when it comes to soft tissues that have survived 40,000 years. However, the main mystery is not preservation as such. The main mystery lies in the distribution of the finds. The remains of mammoths and other animals are not encountered evenly. There are stretches of shoreline where their concentration is far above the statistical norm. It looks as though, during certain periods, animals came again and again to the same spots. Perhaps they were attracted by mineral springs, perhaps by a particular landscape, food supply, or outlets of unfrozen water. But there is still no exact answer. Scientists were especially struck by a find on Maly-Liakovsky Island in the Lena Delta. In 2013, a female mammoth was discovered there in whose body cavity a dark liquid substance had been preserved. This was an exceptional case. Such an ancient specimen usually preserves nothing like that in liquid form. Even stranger was the fact that, at a temperature of about -10 degrees, this liquid did not freeze completely. This led researchers to speak of possible natural biochemical mechanisms of protection against freezing. The nature of this phenomenon is still being studied. The Lena has another secret as well, less noticeable but very important. It is connected with water that enters the river not from above, but as if from below. The Lena receives hundreds of tributaries over the course of 4,400 kilometers. Its water balance has been measured for many years. And there is something strange in these measurements. During the low water period, when the summer water level is at its minimum, the discharge of some tributaries drops sharply almost to zero. For small rivers, this is not sensational. But then something unusual happens. In autumn, water returns to them faster than can be explained by precipitation. It appears earlier than it should arrive with ordinary surface runoff. Hydrologists are considering the possibility of groundwater feeding. Beneath the permafrost, there may be talics, that is, unfrozen water-bearing zones. They can accumulate water and then redistribute it independently of rain and surface melt. The problem is that their configuration in the Lena Basin has barely been mapped, and that means that part of the water for one of the world's largest rivers comes from an underground system that no one has really seen or measured properly. Finally, thousands of petroglyphs have been preserved on the rock outcrops along the banks of the Lena and its tributaries. The most famous complexes are located near Shishkino in Irkutsk Oblast, as well as in hard-to-reach parts of Yakutia. These drawings were created in different eras, from the Neolithic to historical times. For several thousand years, people came to the same rocks and left their marks. That alone says a great deal. The place was not merely noticed. It was considered special. But the real mystery is not that the rocks were used for so long. The mystery lies in the content of the oldest layers. That is where the questions begin. Questions to which archaeology still gives only partial answers. The Lena, how to pose questions to which science still has no ready answers. And the deeper researchers peer into its banks, delta, and bed, the more oddities they find. On the rocks of the Lena Basin, images have been found whose age is estimated at roughly 12 to 15,000 years. Among them are figures of animals that do not match the known fauna of this region from that era. Their anatomy falls outside familiar patterns. Some details resemble real beasts, others fit no confident classification. Nearby, there are also geometric signs with no direct parallels in other Siberian petroglyphs. But what is especially strange is not only what is depicted, but how it was done. The deepest layers of carving were made with such force and precision that, in the opinion of some researchers, tools made of a material harder than granite would have been needed. And here a simple question arises. What material was that, if we are talking about the inhabitants of the Lena 12,000 years ago? There is still no convincing answer. Beyond that, the mysteries only multiply. The Lena Delta is one of the largest on the planet. Its area is about 32,000 square kilometers. It contains more than 1,500 islands. But this is not a frozen map. It is a living labyrinth. Islands are built up, eroded, shifted, and disappear so quickly that cartography does not always keep up with reality. The reason is not only the current and sediment. A deeper process is underway beneath the delta. The permafrost here is thawing from below because it is in contact with unfrozen seawater. The ground subsides. Thermokarst lakes appear. The relief itself changes. Geologists believe that in the coming decades the configuration of the delta may change so drastically that today's maps will become outdated. In 2020, satellites recorded several areas in the delta with unusually strong methane emissions. In summer, the water above these points literally boils with bubbles. For the region, these values are noticeably above background levels. Such emissions matter not only for geology. They may be linked to permafrost degradation and the instability of ancient bottom sediments. And the Lena Delta is also one of the most important hubs of life in the entire Arctic. Tens of millions of migratory birds nest and stop here. Ornithologists are already noting an alarming detail. Some areas that birds used regularly before are now being avoided. Routes are changing. The reason is not yet clear. Perhaps it is the food base. Perhaps hydrology or water chemistry. There is still not enough data. By the way, if details like these interest you, subscribe to the channel. Here we examine not only headline-grabbing facts, but also the observations from which major scientific discoveries are later born. A separate story is connected with the omul. For the Lena, it is not just a fish, but one of the river's main biological symbols. The Lena population of omul is genetically different from both the Baikal population and the populations of other Siberian rivers. This is surprising. Theoretically, through the tributary system, exchange of individuals is possible. But genetics shows marked isolation. That means the Lena omul developed in isolation, although the mechanism of that isolation is not fully understood. So poorly understood, in fact, that some researchers even raise the question of classifying the Lena omul as a separate subspecies. But even more astonishing is its journey. Feeding takes place in the delta and in the Laptev Sea. But to spawn, this fish travels upstream for 1,500 and sometimes 1,700 kilometers. For freshwater fish, this is one of the longest spawning migrations in the world. How the omul finds the right spawning grounds over such a distance, science does not know for certain. Magnetic sensitivity is discussed. The chemical memory of water is being tested. Other mechanisms are also being considered. But there is no final answer. Moreover, in recent years, fishermen and observers have recorded yet another change. The omul has begun going to spawn several weeks earlier than usual. The fact is documented. The cause is still disputed. Where the Lena enters the Laptev Sea, two very different water systems collide. On one side is fresh river water, with an enormous amount of suspended matter. On the other is salty Arctic water. There is no clear line between them. There is a broad transition zone stretching for dozens of kilometers. Within it, temperature, salinity, density, and chemical composition change in complex and uneven ways. And it is precisely here that hydrophones installed during joint Russian and German expeditions recorded unusual low-frequency sounds. They resemble neither signals from living organisms, nor known hydrophysical processes usually expected at such a water boundary. This is not a sensation in the newspaper sense, but it is a real scientific anomaly that has not yet been confidently explained, and the Lena has an influence that extends far beyond the river itself. The Laptev Sea is considered one of the main regions of Arctic sea ice formation. A significant part of the Arctic Ocean's ice forms precisely here, and the discharge of fresh water by the Lena noticeably affects this process. In other words, the river participates in the ice regime of a vast Arctic basin. The general scheme is understood, but the exact parameters of this influence are still being refined. For climate science, this is a very important question. On the floor of the Laptev Sea, in the zone of Lena discharge, large masses of organic material have accumulated over millennia. In the cold and under pressure, gas hydrates can form here. These are solid compounds of water and methane. If the water warms, such structures become unstable. How large these deposits are near the Lena Delta has not yet been established precisely, and that means the possible scale of future gas emissions is also not fully understood. The Lena preserves not only natural mysteries, it preserves memory as well. The Evenks, one of the indigenous peoples of the basin, passed down knowledge of the river orally for centuries. Before writing, this was how navigation, descriptions of fords, rapids, depths, and dangerous places were preserved. And researchers of the 19th and 20th centuries noticed an important feature. Many legends described specific stretches of the river with a precision too great for an ordinary artistic tale. Evenki place names often contained information about the nature of the bottom, the strength of the current, or the depth. It was a language of memory and orientation. The Finnish linguist Kastren, who worked with Evenki informants in the 1840s, recorded descriptions of several places on the Lena. At the time, he could not verify them on site, but later, Hydrological expeditions confirmed some of this information. And that is not all. Some legends told that in the past the Lena flowed differently, and geomorphological analysis showed that in a number of such places, there really had been ancient channels that the river abandoned thousands of years ago. It turns out that oral tradition preserved the memory of real landscape changes across an immense depth of time. This is no longer just folklore. This is a special way of preserving precise knowledge about a territory. And finally, one of the strangest episodes is connected with the 2019 expedition in the middle reaches of the Lena. At that time, hydrophones were installed on the riverbed as part of a Russian-German hydrological project. The task was routine. They needed to record the river's background acoustic environment, and then compare it with data on the state of the ecosystem. On the third day, the instruments registered an unusual signal. It was a periodic low-frequency pulse. It repeated about once every 4 minutes. The frequency lay in the infrasonic range, that is, below the threshold of human hearing. But the most important thing was something else. The source was coming neither from the surface nor from the water column. The signal was rising from beneath the riverbed. The researchers checked the usual explanations. There was no seismic activity in the region. Industrial facilities were more than 200 kilometers away. Known biological sources for such a range do not inhabit these fresh waters. The gas emission hypothesis was also considered, but the acoustic profile did not match. The hydrophones recorded this pulse for 11 days, and then it disappeared, without explanation. For now, the expedition checked everything it could: the chemical composition of the water, temperature, pressure, and other parameters. But not a single instrument showed an anomaly that could point to the source of the strange signal. The materials from this work were published in 2021 in a specialized hydrology journal, and the most astonishing thing came at the end. In the conclusion section, there was an almost disarming admission. Just one phrase. Requires further study. It sounds modest, but a great deal is hidden behind that formula. The Lena passes through one of the least studied territories on Earth. Over vast stretches, its channel has been explored only partially. In some places, the bottom still has no accurate map, and many tributaries are connected to underground water systems that science still knows only through indirect signs. On its banks, the remains of animals frozen tens of thousands of years ago are found. This is not a metaphor, but the reality of Siberian permafrost. In its waters, live fish that travel enormous distances along ancient routes. Some migrations extend for more than 1,500 kilometers. By the way, if mysteries of nature like this interest you, subscribe to the channel. Here we examine exactly these kinds of stories, and yet the strangest fact remains the same. In 2019, somewhere underwater, something was making a sound, exactly once every 4 minutes, without interruption, and then it suddenly fell silent. Most of these data are documented, but there is still no complete explanation. The Lena keeps its answers very deep, and apparently it is in no hurry to reveal them. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you again soon.